So we've got another dude kicked off YouTube, Facebook, whatever, because of misogynist comments. And these are just the ones we know about making comments like this because they're so big. I can only imagine how many more there are making these same comments on smaller platforms in smaller ways. Toxic masculinity is where it comes from. That club that every man is initiated into, and only the strongest or most self-aware are able to resist. Men don't naturally come with a group of men to talk to. And that's so unfortunate. I look at this tweet I found on Twitter. Men my age are horrifically boring, he wrote. I don't care about cars or home renovations or sports or your lawn. I want to know what makes you cry, what songs you love, what work you're doing to repair trauma, what scares you, what you're doing to make the world a better place. I love this guy, and I don't even know him because he's writing what the majority of men I know feel but can't express or even identify with. This guy, some random guy on Twitter, wrote this thing and had to lock his account. He had to lock his account because he got so much hate from it in the comments. You know how many women I coach, women I know who would love a guy who thinks like this? Except most of them won't admit that they're comfortable enough in their own skin to even date a guy like this because of how prevalent toxic masculinity has affected them too. It's affected all of us. And that's why it's so toxic, because it's not just men it hurts us women too. Too many of us raised in this culture can't even get past that feeling we get when we read something like this. He's too soft, too wimpy, too much a woman for me. Even as their hearts break over some devastatingly horrible breakup with some guy who had to be so tough on the outside because of this same thing we're talking about that he was raised in. And there you go. Toxic masculinity, it shows up again. It's everywhere. When you tell your friends you found a great guy and you start describing him, or they meet him and they're like, oh, we sound sweet, until they start seeing just how much he lets his hair down with you, and now they're like, are you sure this guy's enough of a guy's guy? And don't get me started about all the women that I'm personally coaching right now who in the same breath that they used to cry about this guy who's broken their heart for like the umpteenth time, goes on to add, but I want a guy's guy. And my recommendation that maybe it's a more comfortable in his own skin evolved guy that they might actually be interested in. Well, years ago, I was steeped in this thing we didn't have a name for back then, that we now know is toxic masculinity. And I kept throwing my heart against a brick wall every time some tall, dark, handsome guy with an attitude and with a heart of stone showed me enough potential of a softer side of him to make me claim him as my next biggest challenge. Yep, just like the happy ending girl gets guy fairy tales in movies I couldn't get enough of back then too. That was exactly what I was going to do with this new guy whose potential only I could see. Well, did I get any of them? Nope. I went through years and years of heartbreak instead, telling myself, just like my clients do, that I needed a certain type of guy, and that's the only guy that I'm attracted to, until someone woke me up. Don't tell me that toxic masculinity is just something about a guy saying something that you can't say anymore and getting banned and we've gotten too soft or whatever along those lines. The problem is toxic masculinity is everywhere and it's affected and torn apart everyone. Men, women, family, kids, everyone who's bought into what was sold to us that men are just like this and we have to put up with it while it tears apart marriages, lives, careers, and the most innocent of all, the kids born into unions of men and women who, wittingly or not, pass these on down to the next generation of kids. We've got a bigger problem than the latest top name to show up in my news feed as being banned on some social media platform that it's finally gotten bad enough for, or the public outcry is finally enough to do something about it. It's affecting all of us. Now, what's the answer? Well, first recognizing it for the problem that it is, not just the social media blitz while it trends on Twitter or YouTube. No. See, the reason why the suicide rate amongst men is so high, the reason why the divorce rate is on par with the rate of kids displaced from broken marriages, and half of the population keeps walking around pretending everything is just fine, is because of what we've learned it means to be a man. It's everything that's the opposite of this guy's tweet. It's a guy who can cry, a guy who can talk about how he feels, a guy who knows he needs people and a strong social circle, a guy who can admit he's wrong, a guy who loves his kids and recognizes the imperfect home of toxic masculinity that he was raised in that made him think it's his way or the highway. And from this woman who used to chase after every bad boy in the book, looking to prove I was worthy enough by this toxic measure of getting one of these guys, it's what I finally fell in love with when I finally figured out the difference between a real man and a man who thinks he's one. It affects us as women too, and then it does an even deeper damage by reinforcing for men who try to break this cycle that the only way to keep a woman who seems like she likes this side of him, but then tells him she's just not that into him or isn't feeling it for him, is by throwing off this new side he's trying out that feels more authentic to him and go back to the old way that's the most familiar. More toxic masculinity.